again, back to how maximalist I sometimes feel, like I think it's a bit of a pity to design a flow diagram around an agentic workflow and feel like, crank up intelligence by a factor of 10x. Are you still happy with your choice? Crank it up by 100x. Are you still happy with this choice? There has to be a moment where it seems like you would want to delegate some of the decisions on the actual architecture of the flow to to an agentic system. So that's where I feel like there may be a hamstring.
We recently reviewed Dust, which lets companies create AI agents with access to organizational info without writing code. We were lucky enough to sit and ask questions to Gabriel, the co-founder and CEO, about Dust's positioning and talk about the future of agents. Let's hear more about Gabriel and dive into the future.
It's been Dust for 2.5 years. Stan and I met just about 22 years ago. We were in undergrad together. And then we started a company that was acquired by Stripe in 2014. We called it data analytics. We'd probably call it AI today. Spent 5 years there, worked on a bunch of different things together and separately from Stan. My latest role there was I was the product lead for the merchant intelligence division, which was responsible for at-scale management of fraud and credit risks, which was the sort of dual pattern that we had on how bad merchants or good merchants doing bad things or good merchants doing good things that turned out bad could hurt, right? And that was a lot of classification and prediction when it comes to AI land. And then at Allen, where I went for 3 years, Allen was a company that was about 150 people when I joined as chief product officer, of 600 people when I left. And the bet there was to grow the product team while staying true to its internal operating principles, which were sort of written first, asynchronous first, no meetings, no managers, remote, blah, blah, and how you structure information in order for its consumption and propagation to be done was definitely one of the, if not inspirations, at least took a data point that I felt was interesting to look at how competitive advantages on internal process power are built by companies and how, if you get better at propagating the truth across your company, you just have an intrinsic advantage over companies that do the same thing, but just propagate the truth a little slower. And so the Dust vision was that Stan and I never really stopped talking after leaving Stripe in 2019. We didn't really know what would be the next chapter, but it felt like LLMs were an interesting missing block in slurping up information internally, reformulating it on the fly, and then pushing it to the right places for the right people at the right time, which is what we're trying to do.
I'll just kind of kick off with almost a prediction, a little bit of prediction, a little bit of, you can answer how you feel, you can pick one, you can give a probability distribution, whatever you prefer. So out of the following, what do you think is most likely to happen in a year? One, everyone, specifically non-technical folks, will become experts at writing great prompts, great instruction sets, understand the limitations of models and how to interact with them, and iterate on it. Two is the real promise of RPA is fully realized. Robots can watch me work for one instance, and they will go off and do repetition and variations of it very, very well. Three, something akin to an autonomous system that listens to inputs and outputs business outcomes.
I guess the question behind the question is that a collectively exhaustive and mutually exclusive set of outcomes to give you probability distributions?
They're not easy, so
not quite easy. I'll put more of my wish than maybe expectations, or I can explain both. I think the first one is pretty low. Specifically as described, I don't think that instruction writing is a skill that people should focus on picking up too much. I don't think prompt engineer is a job, and so I think one is pretty low. I think on RPA again, for certain tasks, sure. But I think that scope of tasks is A, relatively small, and B, maybe a bit of a disappointing outcome if that's how we think of the future of organization work. And the two reasons I'd say that is, one, I think I'd be sad if computers interacted with other computers the way humans interact with computers. I'm sure there's better ways to do that. And so by construction, copying humans to do the work is probably a subpar solution space. The second one is, humans don't do great things all the time. And I think that in order to understand what they are not doing, to understand the emission space, there's a lot RPA can't take in. And so I think that, from my Stripe days, understanding how a risk analyst would do the review of an account, how quickly they were able to make a determination, and how different from one risk analyst to the next those methods were, despite having very similar outcomes, for example, was fascinating. Like, do you standardize everybody to one method? Do you try and understand and infer what the actual deterministic bit in their analysis was and get to that? So yeah, I think that's pretty disappointing. And then, and sorry, the third one was it's like a ambient AI and it just spits out the answer. I think some of that is pretty promising. I'd say like preloaded ambient. And so I think in the preloaded, what I feel is very valuable is ambient. I'm very convinced we'll get used to. People will forget the AI is there. I think we've already seen how immune we are to AI note takers, and if we get value from it, we'll be comforted in the decision to have ambient AI around. The preloaded bit is, I think that there's a lot of context that increases the value of the ambient AI, and that context needs to be stored, understood, manipulated, observed, shared, discussed, debated, all those verbs. So it wouldn't be enough to just have something that kicks off. That thing would have to be preformed in a pretty intense way. But I like the third one over the two others for sure.
One push on the second one is it's less about repetition and more, to me, like a gradient. It's like the second version is AI can learn from that example and may not like emulate, but can figure out input outputs on their own from examples.
It's the collaboration model. It's like, how do you see the collaboration model evolving? Is it just going to be, is this kind of the RPA-ish, an augmentation of that kind of context you're talking about? A way to correct maybe even? Or do we see that collaboration being, just this kind of natural language back and forth?
Yeah, I mean, we're going back to trying to understand what the model is going to infer and what we're asking it to be able to act on or not. So, can it understand intent? Probably on some cases. Does it always understand intent on all the cases we'd want it to? Probably not, because we're not always super upfront about our intent to begin with. So I'd say that what I meant by it's like maybe a slightly disappointing niche area is some of the more impactful things we do are not a series of clicks on the computer. Yeah. I think that making a decision that requires 0 clicks but moves a portion of a company in the right direction is actually where we'd love the help of AI, because historically we've made monumental mistakes as humans by thinking that we were smart and making those big decisions, and by the time the computers come in, it's sort of too late to fix it. And sometimes I look at the energy with which developers are pouring their days into fighting some of Quad Code suggestions on architecture decisions. And it's like, well, it's interesting because frankly, we're maybe not bringing the machine in at the right time. Like maybe the collaboration should be at a much higher order of abstraction, and we're just not comfortable with the layers of abstraction that we have there, and the vocabulary and the clarity of outcomes there. And so we're sort of reverting to what we can measure well, but what we can measure well is not always the most impactful.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. I mean, I also really think that this question of how do you collaborate and learn from humans is going to be one of those big questions that something like Dust will have to think about. And, it's like you build your agent, and then how do you go back and give it some feedback? How do we learn from each other?
Yeah. Multi-agent, multi-human collaboration on deep work is really the big frontier. Like our claim is to try and become an operating system. You're not an operating system if you can't be part of the system, right? And the system is multi-human and multi-agent. And just the point of, the point that you're making on memory, like, does the agent get to have a memory? Like, as a B2C user of ChatGPT, I'm super happy that it understands my time zone and my preferences when it comes to restaurant bookings with my wife. But as the member of a team that is part of a function, that is part of a company, which memory should override which memory when I start asking an agent to do a thing? And when those memories collide, how do I resolve? And so I think that that's a really interesting, because complex use case where we're just on day one, and we're really excited to dive into that, because if we're going to do a lot of work with machines on complex projects, we're going to have to be able to trust that they work, and trust is going to be in part explainability, in part observability, and sometimes just policy setting, which I think we're frankly nowhere on when it comes to agent memory.
We have a lot of agents that are part of the incident process, and one of our dreams is to have a participant in the warm room. So someone who's also conversing with the rest of the team, like being an active participant, as opposed to like a one-on-one conversation.
Yeah.
Almost like extrapolating that to, hey, having a member of the team, like having an org structure with agents in it. Do you feel like we're anywhere close to that? Is Dust part of the middle of the process, end-to-end process? Like, how do you think of work in that way?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we're probably a little more maximalists on that view than people give us credit for. Like we're quite excited by the model whereby agents are part of the team. I think that the metaphor of like agents as team members sometimes breaks down because you want them to act in exactly the way you would not want to have a team member act. Just in terms of like authentication, right? Sometimes you want your action to be signed as by you.
Yeah.
Sometimes you'll want your action to be signed as this is not me, this was my agent. And sometimes you want the action to be done by an entity that represents the team or represents the project or represents the customer. And there's so much more that's possible that it seems almost disappointing to sort of revert back to what feels comfortable, i.e. team members that share a payroll provider and an employer. So the org chart thing sometimes breaks down. But yeah, we're very excited by some like agent management system, which is what we're building in essence, has as much to borrow from HR software as it does from observability pipelines and evals. And I know it's another topic that's of interest to you. You want your agents to be designed to serve a purpose. You want them to be deployed and get to the right places. You want them to get better every day. You want people to be able to interface with them in a way that's comfortable, win-win, positive, etc. All these things have a lot to learn and borrow from the ways in which we interact with humans.
Makes sense.
That's great. Hopefully Dust org chart soon then. We can go and click in.
Well, hang on. Just the one thing on that I feel is interesting is I see as in terms of predictions, I see a pretty near-term future where it becomes, if not expected, at least welcomed and incentivized for team members to share as part of their performance reviews how they've had impact through the agents that they've deployed. Like, why shouldn't they, right? If you've built a great piece of software that's getting used by a bunch of team members and saving them a bunch of time, how should that not be explicitly back to you in terms of credit? And I'm curious when people think about fully automated systems that sort of try and take humans out of the loop, where is the incentive for the improvement coming from at that point? It's not coming from the team itself, it's coming from the provider of the software, or it's not coming from like the very sort of last mile, super granular interface of that agent system with the real world. Sometimes the incentives can get distorted, but I think it's healthy for people to be challenged to say, hey, this software runs, and thanks to me, it's made the business better, saved the customers a bunch of time, stuff like that.
Yeah, and with the people, I guess the teammate analogy, as a manager for a long time, that is a little bit of what, managers maybe don't get credit for, but it is about the impact of your team. So if you can see the impact of your team of agents doing work, you should absolutely that's part of how you're being reviewed, is like, are you managing that team of agents well?
Many ICs would tell you that managers get too much credit for it, but
I agree.
But yeah, I think we're all going to be like in the orchestration of these more and more complex systems. We're all going to start taking on some of the job description of what a manager, what a benevolent manager does today, which is provide guidelines, try and give good and bad examples, give context. Provide great and elegant stoppage points or breakage points for people not to mess up. A lot of how we think of articulating our work when we communicate directly with a machine sort of internalize that. But I think that now that we're looking at asynchronous systems, multi-agent systems, we have to, again, find that higher order of abstraction, pause and think, all right, what's the work plan here? How can I explain to somebody, as if I was going off for 2 weeks, what needs to happen, what needs to be escalated, what would be success, and what it would look like?
I'm curious if you feel that the current, or I'll call last generation of automation platforms, if they're missing something obvious. And specifically, I'm thinking of products that are sort of workflow focused, things like Zapier, N8N, Retool. They were initially all pushing for determinism. This happens, there's like clear guidelines. But now they're all building like agents. Do you feel like that's a leg up? Do you think that's limiting? How do you think of that cohort?
Yeah. There's an interesting chat between Harrison Chase and Stan on that, by the way, as a segue. It might be a good episode, because I think that their views mostly align, but maybe differ slightly on that. So I think ultimately the two systems could almost, like, it goes back to what you define as an agentic system, right? And so like if you say that an agentic system is a system where a fork in the decision diagram is settled by the output of an LLM, then you have an agentic system because you're sort of not ex ante able to determine exactly the path of the flow. You have systems that contain agents that are very deterministic. And I think that's where people are getting a little confused. Like if you just added an LLM block in an otherwise very deterministic flow diagram, it's not clear to me that you've sort of breached the threshold of agentic in terms of workflow. So I think that you can do pretty much any of the business things that you want in either way, if not now, then in the future. Not necessarily at the same cost, not necessarily with the same profiles of like risk and risk mitigation, but like you can imagine systems that sort of behave in almost indistinguishable ways. But it comes down to what these platforms have built in terms of user patterns, distribution patterns within companies, how they're observed, how they're measured, and how they contribute to the success of the company. Automation platforms, by and large, got their success from powering high volume, low margin, high throughput workflows where we felt comfortable enough taking the humans out in the first place because we felt comfortable enough to determining and modeling out reality in a way that we could then fire and forget. Those systems tend to be simpler systems. So then you're back to the question of like, are my systems simple or complex? And those products have had tremendous success with a population within that company. That doesn't mean that every person in the company could then sort of onboard on that product and get, all right, I'm excited to try this out. So I think there's also going to be legacy in terms of usage patterns there. Again, back to how maximalist I sometimes feel, like I think it's a bit of a pity to design a flow diagram around an agentic workflow and feel like, crank up intelligence by a factor of 10x. Are you still happy with your choice? Crank it up by 100x. Are you still happy with this choice? There has to be a moment where it seems like you would want to delegate some of the decisions on the actual architecture of the flow to an agentic system. So that's where I feel like there may be a hamstring in that system.
Yeah. We've talked to a couple of customers who were, I guess, almost surprised when they just went full, I guess, away from the workflow model of just the inputs it could handle. Like they had tickets come in where, hey, they put in more than one email and it's like, okay, actually it does multiple inputs pretty well. If they just like flip names, it's just like it figures out the inputs. And I think that it takes a few of those to be like, oh, actually, yeah, that's a lot better.
Economists have been amazing at wrongly modeling the world for centuries. I think we should take more pages from their playbook, which is like the humility that some have taken from it. Was like, we're pretty bad at describing complex systems. Mm-hmm. And when you try to design a workflow, you're essentially trying to design a system. And you've called out all the options, and have you?
I have to imagine, and you can tell us if we're wrong, that when you go to market, talk to customers, sometimes they want a little determinism. And does that ever happen? It's like, I'm a little worried it's non-deterministic. Can you give me, and I know y'all have the apps as well, but I'm curious, like, do you just help educate them or how do you kind of challenge that, I guess?
It's a great question because it's definitely a concern. I think what we're in the sort of midst of is one of the biggest transitions of the entire workforce from post World War II to now. Workers have been told that machines behave like calculators. Like if you press the same keys, you're going to get the same result. And we have built our entire conception of what the workplace should be around that. Not in terms of prediction and classification. I mean, I know there's like details of how we've used stochastic models and probabilities to understand that. But now we're looking at stochastic tools for outputs. Mm-hmm. And so the entire workforce is essentially having to move to a stochastic mindset, a non-deterministic mindset, or at least I think the part of the workforce that is going to be able to embrace that mindset is going to thrive. Traders have been making a bunch of money on stochastic mechanisms and a stochastic mindset for decades. So I don't fear that there's a lot to do there. It's really coming down to how people are able to understand and appreciate long tail risk. What is the worst case scenario? What is the type of distribution of outcomes that I'm looking at? Mm-hmm. And so what we're often having to describe is like, well, how bad is it if it gets it wrong 1 in every 10 times? Mm-hmm. How bad is it if it gets it wrong 1 in every 10 times, but it's gotten faster 9 of the other 10 times by a factor of 2x? and having people start understanding what trade-offs they're really making, because in some cases they just hadn't been given the opportunity to verbalize those trade-offs. So there's certain deterministic inputs that I think that we are building and that we will support, like triggers, like knowing that something kicks off when it is Monday morning is an example of a deterministic part of a workflow that I think is completely reasonable. People tend to start their week on a Monday morning. Building a schedule for that week is a great time. It's a great time to do it on Sunday night or Monday morning. It's in terms of the outputs that I think people tend to be a little guarded, in part because they haven't been taught how to think in distributions when it comes to outcomes.
Yeah, it's a hard problem. I mean, one of my first jobs in the space for consumer was Alexa. And that was one of the things we had to teach even our own PMs who were designing new scenarios. They'd say, hey, every time I say this, I want this outcome. It's like, well, it's a natural language processing model that may not always quite get it if it thinks that you added one word here or misinterprets something you say. And it comes back to this, like, what are those trade-offs you're willing to make, like you said? And how do you actually evaluate these systems, which evaluation becomes a very important part at work, for consumer products that use machine learning, for any of these kind of products as well.
Evaluation of the humans that are making decisions on these architectures too, because I think one of the reasons that there have been reservations with non-deterministic systems as tools is because people are afraid that their personal credibility, performance, or evaluation will suffer from the negative outcomes of such a system. Like if this thing goes wrong, I look stupid. And that's a very fair case. Like if something's shooting out emails on your behalf and people think those emails are coming from you and what the emails contain is not good, like you're going to be very hesitant to roll that system out. So understanding what the shape of distributions and outcomes is and how to evaluate it, what the utility function of you building on that system is something very few people have been asked to do.
Related to maybe the cohort or group of folks who are already comfortable with stochastic outcomes, do you do anything special in deployments and pilots to almost, I'm going to say, garner that exploration, that creativity of like how to work with a system that lets you do a lot?
We have different types of, so we refer to them as builders. If you're designing an agent, to me, you're a builder. We've got the spectrum ranging from highly enthusiastic with limited technical ability to highly technical and potentially very cautious, or at least like asking to setting a very high hurdle for performance. What we try and show are examples of how people express what they're trying to do with the technology and seeing how close to that grid we can snap with simple building blocks. And so, of course, we've got like onboarding workshops, we have identification of use cases, all that. But what we're really trying to do behind that is understand how empowered those builders are in their organization, because time and time again, we are proven wrong on who they are. We think we know who the best builders are going to be, and we're always surprised. And it seems to be that there's a large mindset component that is not connected to technical ability, but is actually more directly connected to transversal thinking, iterative thinking, exploratory thinking, self-confidence, the ability to see the tasks that you do day to day as not being the be-all end-all of your job, but actually something that if some of those tasks could go away and that time could be reclaimed for other things, it's not a bad thing, it's a good thing. Your company's probably going to promote you, not fire you. So all those bits that I think are really good predictors of that. And so a lot of the time we do spend is more about that mindset onboarding, because understanding the tools is relatively straightforward. I think this is really the first no-code interface. If we're going to talk about low and no-code over the past decades, like this is the first time that you can talk to it and it does the thing. If you only just squint a little bit, that's what it's already technically capable of. And so then it's really about, okay, well, how close to really being able to express your company's priorities are you? How much context do you have on what a great outcome would be? Or have you been siloed into a part of the company that has told you to do this task because it's actually the only part of the solution space that's available to you, not because it's the optimal outcome, but because you're not even plugged in to the other bit of the company that would allow you to do a better version of your job? Because I think that's really sometimes how we get some of our most powerful use cases. And the most powerful use cases aren't always the most revolutionary in how many dollars in absolute terms they serve per day on day one, but they are powerful in that I think they really speak to how companies are ambitiously rewiring themselves for this future. If it's cross-functional, if it's grabbing the information from the true source of truth rather than an intermediated and distilled summary that's come from a stale version of that truth, because that's how we processed the data until recently. That's really interesting to me. Also, hub and spoke approaches, like is the same call transcript processed by one agent or n agents? I think is the shape of things that we're really excited about, because it speaks to how we can really just mesh these and graph these together.
We've been chatting with customers who are already sort of rolling their own internal agents for DevOps use cases. And I think an interesting split that we've seen is two interesting splits. One was half and half, sort of bottoms up. Folks have been just trying it and then pushed it upward, then it just ended up being how things are operating. And the other half is there's like a central AI excellence or some sort of top-down, hey, let's explore, and it sort of spurs creativity. And oddly enough, if we split again, there's half of these all came from hackathons. They were just internal hackathons, and now they're part of the process. I'm curious, does any of that resonate? Does that split sound about similar for builders?
Yeah, we definitely see all those situations. I think we're also observing to a certain degree the transient phase that we're in. Like, this technology did not exist 3 years ago. A number of companies saw senior engineers come up to management and say, hey, either I'm allowed to hack on this for 3 months or I'm going to quit and start a company in this space. So, under the pressure of the gun, I think that a few AI engineering teams sort of sprouted up left, right, and center. There's going to be an exploration phase and there's going to be a rationalization phase in the future. But I really second your observations in terms of where the energy is coming from. So bottoms up, the individual craft and curiosity that comes from a really good understanding of like a concrete day-to-day problem and a decent understanding of what the tools are capable of doing today. And sort of in a sandbox or not, the ability to build a prototype. We know that demo to production ratios are very high in LLM land. So sometimes the prototype is just a little too good to be really true. But you've, in very short amounts of time, shown concretely what could happen, and then people can squint a bit and see the future. The top-down pressure or energy that I think is very positive is generally the mandate that explains this technology is for real. It is really going to impact how I work. Now, we don't have the time or the bandwidth or the skills, frankly, to understand all of its possible applications. And so we need to create the environment in which people are empowered to do so. And that, I think, is the biggest predictor of at-scale rollouts with success. I think that is a requirement for companies to be competitive in the future, because we're just embarking on a very hot war for empowered talent. And empowered talent are going to be looking at the market and asking questions like, well, what tools are you giving me to do a better version of my job if I come and work here? Until recently, only developers got to be, divas like that saying, wait, I have to push my code manually via email, and then it gets printed out and added to the mainframe on Saturday mornings once a week. Yep, thank you very much. I'm not going to be applying here. And that's because there was such an obvious arbitrage in like how the tooling could help you do a better version of your job. And that opportunity is getting opened up to many more jobs, many more roles, pretty much anybody with a computer as their main tool for day-to-day use. So I think we see both. And the hackathon thing, I think, was more of a shape of like the energy of the last 2.5 years, starting after the release of ChatGPT at the end of 2022 and going forward. I think that we'll see some of that, but it might be a little more gimmicky or maybe like a little more incidental, because what companies want to do is be in a continuous hackathon, which is, these are our business problems. You are empowered to solve them in the most creative ways, and we are rewarding you to explore on a continuous basis rather than just once a quarter, which I think is like frankly suboptimal.
Internally, we do a lot of like evals management. As we build new systems, we treat evals pretty seriously. We've also talked to customers where they repurpose a large portion of their QA team to just like QA these agents. So I'm curious, like, do you see a lot of manual QA for business processes? Is it more, hey, actually strict evals, partnering with third-party eval systems? I'm curious what you're seeing.
So back to what we do, like if I think about companies, they all have sort of this dual roadmap. They have like generative AI as it will impact our product, and then generative AI as it's going to impact our team, our productivity, our processes, our internal way of doing things. And sometimes those overlap. It depends on the business. They most often do overlap, but we work more on the second half of that equation. So evals for systems that are then fire and forget in your product and potentially interfacing with thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of customers every day. have their role. And it's generally because the types of interactions that your customers are going to have with that system is a little more predictable, a little narrower. And so like the narrower it is and the easier it is to build an eval pipeline yourself or to have a third party help you out with that. On internal productivity, you're much closer to the sort of problem where it's like, well, we retrieved the chunk and we have the original document. Now the question is that documentation up to date or not? And that's really up to Brian, and has he updated the roadmap since we've decided to go to Spain? So I think that theoretical evals at scale are a little more challenging in that environment. What I think you can do is continuous evaluation of some of those agentic systems by their users. And there's a lot of product that we're building, but that we think there's frankly still more room to build to smoothen the path of getting the feedback to the builders of the agents, of understanding how users can become better judges of performance of the systems that they're using, and to lower the barrier to make marginal improvements to those systems over time. I think that's why we're so excited to be building at the product interface and at the product layer, because you can build 10x better versions of that problem. Like, how does a builder get a weekly update to make their agent better? That is a problem space that has bad answers, good answers, and great answers. And so that's where we're trying to build great answers.
I'll jump to pricing. So Datadog has been a consumption-based product for a long time, and our customer base is pretty familiar and used to that. Recently, we launched On-Call and Incident Response, which there are products out there, and it's very much SaaS, seat-based, and it was very hard not to do that. The market was used to that, so we did make it seat-based. I know there's sort of a SaaS model for Dust. How do you think of value in pricing, and then in the future, assuming that presumably more value is accrued per the amount of people using the product, how do you think of that pricing?
I think pricing is a tool to do a number of things. At the end of the day, it's a tool to recoup some of the value that you're generating. But I think it's also a tremendous exploration tool and a way to communicate to the market what you want to measure and what you don't want to measure. And so for us, the promise is that a large amount of untapped talent today in your company could be building agents to do a better version of their job. Mm-hmm. And so the distribution via a seat-based model makes sense because and it's on an active user basis, by the way. So like when people don't use it, they don't pay, because I think we're in the realm of exploration of how should we think about AI internally? What parts of the company should be exploring it more? How easy can it be to test and iterate on things? Mm-hmm. Now, we're in the fog of AI bit, where I think it's hard to actually pin exact ROI to each agent on a case-by-case basis on internal productivity use cases for the least. As we get clearer on where the value is being accrued, I think everybody, in theory at least, should be getting more comfortable with how the value is split. I'm very optimistic on the price per user that Dust will be able to command in the future, because you can talk about competitive pressure, but at the end of the day, if a user thinks that it is incredibly important that they use one product over another product to do a number of things, that gives you an idea of how you're going to be able to command. So I think we'll see layers of pricing. There will be close to seat-based for basic, some utility-related access to summarization, translation, your basic tooling and connection to the rest of the data that's in the company. I think that there could be workload pricing when the workloads are tied to high-value use cases, and it's like fine to run an agent for 20 or 40 minutes on it because you know that the lump of work coming out at the other end is worth that time. And I think there'll be token-based pricing on some of the elements where we benefit from being a unified platform, and the use case that is actually being piped through at the other end is a high throughput customer-facing use case where, frankly, the arbitrage of them using us versus another provider for the model is quite transparent. So at that point, we'll be charging for the access to Dust as a platform and separating out the usage, the volume consumption. What I think was a mistake was to maybe do token-based pricing too early for products in our space, because, well, frankly, the shape of the curve of token pricing is not up and to the right. And so it's generally not a good idea to peg yourself to something that's not going up and to the right. And also, I think it pushed everybody to think in a cost-plus basis too quickly. Like, I was in payments for a long time. Yeah. You're sort of at the end of a conversation if you're talking about cost-plus, and what you're trying to sell is a new way of working or a new way of connecting things or just an upside-seeking opportunity.
So we did a review of Dust a few weeks ago, and we highlighted a few bugs. looks like a lot of them were addressed. So I don't know if that
fast moving.
So it was nice to see. And it does look like y'all updated the video on your landing page. So also thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for the comments. It's like it's rare to have feedback on bugs that we didn't know about already, but it's always a great way to prod internally and be like, all right, guys, it's time to fix this. It's now on YouTube. We just have the clock. Just
That's what I'm gonna have to do for any product I use. I'm gonna put a YouTube update out.
It's nothing new. We used to be tweeting airlines 10 years ago to get free spots when we missed a flight. It's just an audience and a good way to use it. Well, pleasure chatting with you today, guys.
Yeah, awesome. We'll leave it there. Thank you so much, Gabriel, for the time. And talk to you soon.